Welcome to Global Affairs Unfiltered. I'm Jack Stockwell and simulcasting at, I believe, K-Talk. I'm trying to be able to, that's just blocked out. The recording is blocked out. So I don't know if I'm broadcasting at K-Talk. I'm just going to have to assume I am. There are those who always let me know, and I appreciate that. As I bring up my text here, you will inform me. All right, boy, as though there was anything to find to talk about. I have decided what I'm going to do with the these streams. The streams of others that I listen to, that I enjoy the most, are less than 30 minutes long. And I suggested yesterday that I was going to, starting next week, and the health show might be the exception, only stream the second hour of Monday and Tuesday's show, because that's when people are present. During the first hour, the numbers are very thin on the stream. And if you are listening at K-Talk and you would like to listen to the stream, because man, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start doing a bunch of 20 to 30 minute broadcasts during the week that will pile up at X and will pile up at YouTube. We're not on Facebook yet. But if you are listening for the first time in some time and you do not know that I'm streaming at the moment on both X and YouTube. And if you go to X, you'd go to x.com/@globalaffairsuf. You go to x.com/globalaffairsuf. If you want to listen on YouTube, you would go to youtube.com/@globalaffairs_unfiltered. There's not room at X to put in unfiltered, so we put in UF. So on YouTube again, and I'll announce this later in the show because I know there are some people listening at K-Talk that might prefer the stream. At least you get to see my bright smiling face and little Cinnamon there in the background. A stuffed bear that a patient gave me a long time ago for the kids in the clinic, and I just kind of adopted Cinnamon, and I don't know where Lucy is. Oh, Lucy's over there in the corner. I have to show you Lucy, my longtime companion. There she is, up there on the back of the couch, watching over to make sure that the broadcast here is done properly. So once again, starting next week, I'm only going to stream the second hour of Monday and Tuesday's political shows. Probably still stream the whole 2 hours of the health show, but I'm going to break the health show into pieces so then my webmaster, Nick, in Florida, can break them down into separate videos. And I think we're still putting stuff on Vimeo, and I don't know where else. This is all new to me. I'm still trying to figure out my iPhone that I've had for a decade. So I toast you with my herbal tea to activate my brain and get going here this morning, because there's an awful lot to talk about following the inauguration yesterday. And other things that are going on behind the scenes. I don't want you to get caught up in the affairs of state right now and watching one executive order after another start showing up, because I firmly believe, well, I gotta say it, this is a lot of distraction. They are election promises being fulfilled, but there's a lot of distraction going on here, and I'll get to that. Because I expect the status quo to continue. I expect to see weapons continue to flow into Israel, and for a time being, weapons to flow into the Ukraine. Even though Putin yesterday expressed some optimism over the fact that Trump wants to talk to him. but they don't trust him. They don't. They might trust him more than Biden, but they don't trust him enough to back off from what they're doing. So I'll get to that in today's program as well. But I really feel a lot better about this. I was thinking about it in the shower this morning. You know, because the podcasts that I enjoy the most are the ones that I can hear start to finish in a reasonable amount of time. And to me, that's a half hour or less. And that's Judge Napolitano's podcast. And he's got some great guests who are much more familiar and knowledgeable as to world affairs than I am. But they don't. But he's smart enough not to go on longer than it takes you to go to work, or to take the kids to school, or whatever else. And then there's a few minutes left over that you can just listen to over the phone, rather than your car radio or whatever else. And that's what I think I want to do. I would. It's going to require an awful lot more time on my part, but this is my commitment to the salvation of humanity. What can I do? I am a paid member of Schiller Institute, just $50. I give them $50 a month. I'm more than happy to do it. If I had more money, I would give them a lot more money. And then occasional letters to congressmen and senators. And we're going to see here really quick where they stand. Curtis now in there, along with Mike Lee. Mike Lee, of course, is pretty much in favor of Trump. We'll have to see how Curtis votes. I feel pretty objective about the whole thing, but he's a system man. He's been there as long as Lee. And then our other representatives. We'll see how all of this unfolds. But you have to take an active part in this. And not everybody can get on the internet and start streaming their opinions and their shows and whatever. This takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of commitment. It costs money for me to be able to buy time on the internet to do this. But I feel that at the same time, there is some beautiful, wonderful things starting to unfold and open up as far as hope for the world is concerned. There's still some very dark clouds out there, even though a little sun started to shine through yesterday, but we'll have to wait and see. But what concerns me is that Rubio got in as Secretary of State without a dissenting vote. 99-0, unanimous. And then to hear old Chuck Schumer praising Rubio. Whoa. Uh-oh. That's all I could say at the end, that there wasn't a lot of debate and a lot of dissenting votes. They all went for Rubio. Well, Rubio's a war hawk. And the military-industrial complex supplies re-election money, campaign money, to both houses, or both sides of the fence, both sides of the aisle. These are just little things behind the scenes you need to keep in mind. Now, Hegseth, there's a lot of hubbub, and Bondi and a lot of hubbub, and as to what's possible here and there. Don't get distracted by the headline. Always look behind the scenes, which is what I try to dedicate this program to doing. Now, I'm not picking up any bad text. I've got about a half a dozen people who have my private phone number, and all of them friends. And when I need a nudge or something, or somebody to yell at me and tell me to wake up, they're usually the first ones to do it. So there's several things I want to talk about yesterday, especially in this concept of pre-pardoning the pre-crime. It's been done before. It's just never been tested in court. And it's kind of interesting to see how this folds, because President Joe Biden, in just the last moments that he was president, and President Trump talking about it at the arena late yesterday afternoon, was mistaken when he said that Biden was pardoning, excuse me, that Biden was pardoning his family and other people while President Trump was giving his inaugural address. By the time President Trump was giving his inaugural address, he was president, and Biden was no longer president. Uh, the true representation is while President Trump was arriving from the church, from St. John's Church to the Capitol building to be sworn in as president, the last few minutes before the swearing in was when those executive orders went into action. So that seemingly President Trump, during his inaugural speech, now as President of the United States, already sworn in, wouldn't know what had happened, so he wouldn't mention it. Although he was pretty vicious in the first 15 minutes, or first 10 minutes or so of his inaugural address. I mean, he hit the ground running. So President Joe Biden, in those last few minutes as president, pardoned Anthony Fauci and retired General Mark Milley and members of the House committee that investigated the January 6th attack on the Capitol using these extraordinary powers that rest in the executive in the final hours to try to hedge against potential revenge by the new administration. Although Bondi was asked, and she's not Secretary Bondi, or no, she's not Director Bondi yet, as Director of the FBI. No, not FBI. Attorney General, excuse me. She was asked, is there a hit list? Does the president have a hit list? And she says, no, there is no hit list. Well, of course, the left doesn't believe that, so apparently Biden is pre-pardoning these people in the idea that they might be indicted. Certainly Fauci, and then Mark Miller on grounds of treason for what he did to tell China what the United States military was doing during the Trump administration. And then the House committee, all the drummed up stuff and the false information, like what was 150 Capitol Police were injured in a bloody, just ridiculous. So anyway, the decision by Biden to do this stuff comes after Donald Trump warned of an enemies list during his campaign, those who had crossed him politically or sought to hold him accountable for his attempt to overturn the 2020 election loss, and his role in storming the Capitol on January 6th. Now, I noticed on the news broadcast that was covering this, they showed the violent part of the January 6th stuff, where certain people, and we now know without any argument, FBI agents were there in the middle of everybody instigating the crime, of smashing windows and tearing down barriers and all this kind of stuff to make it look like, like a Bolshevik revolution against the Tsar. When the majority of the filming, the interior filming, people are walking around like they're in a museum, visiting the halls and visiting the important areas that tourists would want to see in the Capitol building. They didn't show that part. They just showed the violent part. And then, so anyway, Trump has selected cabinet nominees who back up, who believe in the fact that the election was stolen. Most of these people, on one occasion or another, didn't come right out and say the election was stolen, but they didn't come out and say, no, the election was absolutely fair, and I don't know what Trump is, what's he talking about? So indirectly, they're in favor of that concept. And some of them have pledged to punish those that were involved with the several crimes against the alleged crimes that Trump has committed. And so anyway, this is what Biden said. I'm going to quote Biden here. The issuance of these pardons should not be mistaken as an acknowledgement that any individual engaged in any wrongdoing, nor should acceptance be misconstrued as an admission of guilt for any offense. Our nation owes these public servants a debt of gratitude for their tireless commitment to our country. Well, in that case, why don't you just put a ribbon around their necks with some kind of a bronze award or something, rather than pre-pardoning them? I mean, this is the ultimate clown show. The issuance of these pardons should not be mistaken as an acknowledgement that any individual engaged in any wrongdoing, nor should acceptance be misconstrued as an admission of guilt for any offense. Now, you know he didn't write that. But it doesn't matter. Just because I pardon somebody doesn't mean they were guilty of anything. And then, of course, the logic, the reasoning that they offer is that, well, there's going to be all these trumped up charges by Trump and by Bondi and by Patel, and they're going to do everything they can to punish all these people and throw them in jail like these people threw the January 6th insurrection army into prison, which, of course, you know by now, President Trump, don't have to call him president-elect anymore, President Trump pardoned yesterday. Some of sentences commuted, most of them pardoned. Now, these pardons, and besides Fauci and Milley, of course, the head of the Biden crime family preempted pardons for all members of the Biden crime family. That was part of the last minute stuff too. So there's no more rule of law. You just need, isn't that what they've always said? You just have to know somebody. If you know somebody in a position of power, you can probably get away with anything. If you have the right lawyer, if you have enough money, since there's no justice in the courts, you have the right lawyer, you can get away with murder. Well, these pardons announced just hours have been the subject of heated debate for months at the highest levels of the White House. As President Biden had said often, I'm not going to pardon my son. It's customary for a president to grant clemency at the end of his term. But those acts of mercy are usually offered to Americans who've been convicted of crimes. A lot of times they'll do a sweeping thing of nonviolent crimes, usually involving drug possession, where someone just got a 20-year sentence for holding an ounce of marijuana in a little baggie in their pocket. I can understand that. I would grant some clemency there myself. But Biden has used the power to do this in the broadest, most untested way possible, to pardon those who haven't even been investigated yet. And the decision lays the groundwork for even more expansive use of pardons now, and this is the big argument, or not the argument, the understanding is that Trump can do the same thing. And who would Trump do this for? Because now President Trump, because of recent Supreme Court decisions, can't be held guilty of anything he does acting as president. And I forget which one of the justices had an argument about giving Biden, giving Trump, or any past president that could be hauled in, including Obama, complete immunity. I don't know. I still have mixed feelings about that, because that essentially turns the president into an emperor. Can do just about anything from a federal level. I mean, that's what he's acting from anyway. So while the Supreme Court did give broad immunity from prosecution for what would be considered an official act, the president's aides, the president's allies, the president's cabinet are not shielded in the same way. So there are fears that Trump or future presidents could use the promise of some blanket pardon to encourage members of the cabinet or members of the military or the Treasury Department or even Interior Department to take actions that they might otherwise resist for fear of prosecution. Because they don't need to worry about it now, because President Trump has the get out of jail free card and can be applied before anybody's even thinking about going to jail. So as soon as President Trump, after the inauguration, then he goes to the luncheon, which was, kind of nice and impressive. Then he eventually ends up at the arena, and the parade that would have been going down Pennsylvania Avenue now is marching through the arena. And if you've seen one parade, you usually see them all, except that last group from Mississippi Valley. Wow, I've thoroughly enjoyed that group, especially those dancers, those guys that were dressed as majorettes, majors. Wow, and it just went on and on. I really enjoyed that, but in some of the first things that he signed, pardoned, I don't know if he pardoned them all, but he pardoned a lot of those that were involved in what the press is calling the violent and bloody January 6, 2021 attack. See, it's still sounding like the Bolshevik Revolution, which the news says injured roughly 140 law enforcement officers. I don't know that I ever saw any of that. Now, there was somebody that had a heart attack, some member of the Capitol Police had a heart attack and collapsed to the floor. And then there's allegations of people having their heads bashed in by fire extinguishers and a bunch of other stuff. I never saw any evidence of that. I kept looking for it. But that's what the press is still saying. They haven't left that alone. So it's unclear whether those pardoned by Biden would need to apply for clemency or even accept the offer at all, because you look at Fauci, and he gave Fauci a pardon, a pre-pardon, Mark Milley a pre-pardon, some other people I don't need to mention. But if they accept the pardon, what does that mean? You got me, thanks for the pardon, now I don't have to worry about prosecution. Or would they say, I don't need a pardon, I haven't done anything wrong? Because it looks like a tacit admission of wrongdoing, which would validate the years of attacks by Trump and his supporters, even though those who have been pardoned have not been formally accused of any of these crimes. But they believe, of course, that President Trump has this hit list, that Bondi, even though she says we don't have one, it's hard to believe that someone hasn't put a list somewhere over the last 4 years, especially the lawfare stuff that was going on, and Jack Smith and the rest of them. But you know what he ought to do? In my exalted, learned opinion, forget it. Just let it go and move forward from now. You got enough work to do, President Trump, to fulfill the rest of your campaign promises and to stop war in the Middle East, to stop war in the Ukraine, and stop the possibility of war between Taiwan and China. I think you could do a greater act of clemency than President Biden did there in the last few minutes of his presidency by simply doing that. Now, there are, Biden said, and I quote, "There are exceptional circumstances, and I cannot in good conscience do nothing. Even when individuals have done nothing wrong, and in fact have done the right thing, and will ultimately be exonerated, the mere fact of being investigated or prosecuted can irreparably damage reputations and finances." So what about Fauci? Well, he was director, as you know, of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the National Institute of Health for nearly 40 years, including during Trump's time in office, and later served as Biden's chief medical advisor until his retirement in 2022, when he got out when the getting was good. And so he helped to coordinate the country's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and raised Trump's ire when he resisted Trump's untested public health notions. So Fauci has since become a target of intense hatred and vitriol from people on the right because of the mask mandates and the other policies that infringed on our constitutional rights At the same time, hundreds of thousands of people were dying. Were they dying from COVID? Or were they dying from the flu and cold season, as happens all the time? Or were they dying from something that was injected into their bodies as a result of the presence of COVID? Is there grounds there for investigation into Fauci? Of course there is, especially the gain of function and the fact that what happened in Wuhan was because of him. Mark Milley is the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He later on, as reported, called Trump a fascist and detailed Trump's conduct around the, I think he was the one who came up with the term insurrection. Now, what they don't show, of course, is that when Trump told them, go ahead and go, after he had addressed them, go ahead and go to the Capitol, but go peacefully and respectfully. They don't show that part. They cut that part of the video off. It just sounds like, on to the Capitol and take it in my name and reestablish my reelection, or establish my reelection in the light of all of these false ballots. No, that's what the press tried to impress upon us. That's not what happened. We have the video of the president saying peacefully, respectfully. So he said he was grateful to Biden for the pardon, as he no longer has to worry about retribution. I guess that's a good word. You don't want to say, well, I don't no longer have to be worried about my guilty role in committing treason against the president and the United States. I don't know if you can commit treason against the president, but you certainly can commit treason against the United States. And yes, I can put my mouth closer to the mic. I wonder if I could turn up the gain on the mic. That might help. But never forget about this. You know, when he says, I don't have to worry about, you know, being put in the stock and pillar. He was the one who communicated with China behind the sitting president's back and told them he would give China a heads up if America decided to attack China. As the Joint Chiefs of the commander of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, where you have all these representatives of the various armed forces make up this staff. He's in charge of them. He's the commander. And he tells China, if President Trump ever decides to attack you, I'll let you know ahead of time. So Biden also pardoned members and staff of the January 6th committee that investigated the attack, as well as the D.C. Capitol and the D.C. Metropolitan Police, who testified before the committee about their experiences that day, just overrun by an angry, violent mob of Trump supporters. Actually, they were overrun by agents provocateur who were working for the FBI and the CIA. The stories that have come out on the Joe Rogan podcast and others, just the testimonies of others that were present, and the pictures of people that were in the crowd that were identified in other pictures as being FBI agents. That's who the Capitol Police were overrun by, agents provocateur, egging people on. You see the pictures even of Capitol Police waving people in through the open doors. So the committee, this committee that was, well, they weren't exonerated, but they were given, you know, a pass by President Biden in his last few minutes as president, had spent 18 months investigating Trump and this violent insurrection. And it was the lead U.S. Representative Benny Thompson and Republican from the Democrats and Republican Liz Cheney, who later pledged to vote for Kamala Harris and campaigned with her. And the committee's final report that they found that Donald Trump had criminally engaged in this multi-part conspiracy to overturn the lawful results of the 2020 presidential election and failed to act to stop his supporters from attacking the Capitol. So rather than accept accountability those who perpetrated the January 6th attack have taken every this is what Biden said. Rather than accept accountability, those who perpetrated the January 6th attack have taken every opportunity to undermine and intimidate those who participated in the Select Committee in an attempt to rewrite history, to erase the stain of January 6th for partisan gain, and seek revenge, including by threatening criminal prosecutions. Now, if Biden had talked like that during his debate last summer in July with candidate Trump, he probably would have been reelected. So you know darn well, 6 months later, this is just collective Biden saying this stuff. And but Biden just made a sweeping pardoning the staff and the committee. He never mentioned any names. So Biden promised a smooth transition to the next administration, inviting Trump to the White House, saying that the nation will be okay, even as he warned during his farewell address of a growing oligarchy, which I thought was kind of interesting coming from Biden. And he has spent 4 years as president and the 4 years that Trump was president, warning that Trump's ascendancy, his continuation in the presidency for a second term or to the presidency again would be a threat to democracy. He just warned that just a little while ago. So he said his reasoning in breaking away from the norms that are involved with presidential pardons is to be considered in that light. You know, here we have somebody getting back into office now who, because of immunity from the Supreme Court, will probably become something horrible, and so a threat to democracy. And therefore, I take these actions now. So Biden has set the presidential record for the most individual pardons and commutations ever issued. He announced Friday that he was commuting the sentences of almost 2,500 people convicted of nonviolent drug offenses. I have no problem with that, as long as there weren't drug offenses involving the sale of drugs to children. He previously announced he was commuting the sentences of 37 of 40 people on federal death row, converting their punishments to life imprisonment just weeks before Trump, who is a proponent of expanding capital punishment, takes office. So in his first term, Trump presided over an unprecedented spate of executions. I think 13 in a protracted time during the coronavirus pandemic. And I remember the schism that showed up because he did not work to influence commutation for someone who's apparently terribly mentally ill and had no concept of his coming departure from this existence. Anyway, Trump's aides considered preemptive pardons. We know that now. You know, Biden isn't the first one to do this. And his supporters, he wanted to preempt in the failed efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election that culminated in that riot at the Capitol, and the press calls it a riot. But Trump's pardons never materialized before he left office. Gerald Ford granted a full, free, and absolute pardon in 1974 to his predecessor, Richard Nixon, over the Watergate scandal. And he believed that a potential trial would be prolonged and divisive debate over the propriety of exposing to further punishment and degradation a man who already paid the unprecedented penalty of relinquishing the highest office of the United States, I think, as it was written in the pardon. So why the last-minute pardons, especially the COVID-19 crew, wasn't an engineered U.S. biological weapon? if Milley didn't organize the January 6th, now keep this in mind, might be reaching here. If Milley didn't organize the January 6th coup to prevent Trump exercising his authority to block the steal, and if the January 6th committee didn't slap a pseudo-legal seal on it, why the last-minute pardons? Especially of Fauci, who was very much involved, even earlier than North Carolina and Georgia, with the gain of function. Gain of function, as you know, I'm going to repeat it in case you forgot a little bit of it, is simply how you take a particular pathogen and you make it a killer pathogen. Gain of function is where you start playing with the genetics of something to make it really, really bad, the bad seed. And there's only one reason why you would do that. Not to fulfill some lab assignment on, genetic alteration of living life forms, but for a weapon, a bioweapon. And if the COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2 bug that supposedly causes COVID-19, wasn't an engineered U.S. biological weapon, why the pardon? That's not all that hard to question. I asked somebody near and dear to me yesterday why Melania Trump was wearing that hat. she, if you, very stylish. I mean, it looked like Vogue had a representative at the inauguration. One of the most beautiful women in the world. And the way I don't know who made that outfit that she was wearing, or the outfit she was wearing at the ball last night. Another beautiful outfit. Finally let her hair down. And but that hat she was wearing, I thought it was, it looked like some of the flying saucers we've seen in news coverage that are trying to catch these images up in the sky. But this person said, so you can't see her eyes. Well, I said, well, why do we not want to see her eyes? So she said, so you can't see her eyes rolling back in her head with some of the things that were being said. And I thought that was funny. I just wanted to share that with you. So on his first day in office yesterday, he said he's going to issue, and this was in his inaugural, an order defining a person's sex as male or female, requiring government agencies to use the immutable designation on forms and IDs, especially your passport, while also ordering changes to the federal prison policies that govern transgender inmates. So he said this. No, this is from a White House official clarifying to the reporters. What we're doing today is defining that it is the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female. These are sexes that are not changeable, and they are grounded in fundamental, incontrovertible reality, an incoming White House official told the reporters. So these policies are included in an executive order, one of the dozens that he signed yesterday. I don't know if he signed that one or not, but he'll certainly sign it by today because there's several more. But I think he did sign it yesterday. But the order simply will prevent people from changing their sex on U.S. passports, which currently allow for holders to choose male, female, or X. You're either a male or a female, or you're not one of those two, you're an X. Current law allows that. I don't know if it's law or it's policy, but it got changed yesterday. And he said he will attempt to ban medical transition treatment for prisoners. Well, the lawsuits have already started. The ACLU has already started some lawsuits on some of his executive orders, which is to be expected. They're not going to let him get away with what he's promised his electors who put him into office. But this order will require the Department of Homeland Security and the State Department and other agencies to ensure that official government documents, including passports and visas, reflect sex accurately. This incoming official said. And Americans since 2010, including during Trump's first term, have been able to change their sex on passports by submitting a form with a physician's approval. Since 2010. So the outgoing Secretary Blinken ended the doctor's sign-off for passports in 2021, and he added the X-gender marker in 2022. So the prison policies, meanwhile, will impact a population that the ACLU says, and this is in their lawsuit, 1,200 federal inmates. This same incoming Trump official who was referring to these things says, we're going to add privacy in intimate spaces like women's prisons, women's migrant shelters, rape shelters, and make sure the taxpayer funds are not being used to have so-called transition services. Now, it's unclear how the policy is going to impact transgender prisoners already in custody. Very few transgender inmates have received transition surgeries on the taxpayer's dime, with Texas inmate Donna Langan believed to have become the first in December of 2022, which apparently is I think 19 now. So transgender rights became a campaign issue ahead of last year's election, Trump vowing to end the participation of people born in female sports, males participating in female sports as well. Now, does that mean there can be no more transition surgeries? Well, no transition surgeries paid for by your tax dollars, and certainly none under the age of 18. Now, if somebody who's 19 wants to become something else, as far as I'm concerned, that's their business, as long as the money to do it comes out of their pocket. I'm very egalitarian when it comes to people over the age of 18. I don't care what people do. I don't care what they do in the privacy of their bedrooms or any other place, as long as nobody's being forced to do something and there are no minors involved and my tax dollars aren't paying for it. Other than that, I kind of have a libertarian sense about me. I don't care what they do. And if they want to really mess themselves up by these irreversible surgeries, personally, I think there's an awful lot of mental illness going on here, and I blame our food supply for it. So, Democratic presidential nominee Kamala, the outgoing vice president, received a bunch of negative coverage and groans from her allies following her unearthing. Remember, it came out like from 2 years ago that showed up just before the election. Her past pledge to support taxpayer-funded sex changes for illegal immigrants in federal custody. That didn't help her campaign any. But she defended herself by arguing that doing so was the law and that Trump would have to follow the same guidelines. You gotta love it. All right, now, there's several more things I want to cover besides what's happening with the new president and what's coming out and what's going to make up the first 100 days of this new administration. One of the things that's really clear in my mind is where in the world does he stand on the war in Gaza? Because from every perspective, Israel has lost the war in Gaza. And I want to talk about that in the few minutes that are remaining here. Oh, well, there is a goodly host on this morning. Good. I do appreciate that. So anyway, I want to repeat something I said at the beginning of the show. I am not going to stream the first hour of Tuesdays and Wednesdays programs. I will stream the second hour because that's when the largest amount of people are on there. So I'm going to save the best for the second hour, like I think I'm doing today, because the second hour is when there's a larger audience at K-Talk, and I'm not getting anything for this, as you might suppose. Some of the most poorly paid people in America are K-Talk hosts. In fact, we have a net loss income with K-Talk because of the time and effort that it takes out of our lives to do this. And I have the first week of March, which is 6 weeks away, will be my 30th anniversary of being a part of K-Talk. And the amount of time that I have spent, oh, I'm starting to whine. I'm just saying, I'm trying to do something for my country, I'm trying to do something for my state of Utah, and I'm trying to do something for humanity. And if I can help inspire some people to do something of themselves, and something you can do is this stream is to like and subscribe and repost it. Repost it to others. And if they like it, they can repost it. And that's how you can build an audience pretty quick. So anyway, back to Israel here. Regardless of the seeming success of the ceasefire, the Israeli side, I don't care how you look at this, is the defeated one. I mean, after more than a year of bloody fighting in the Gaza Strip, both sides have reached a ceasefire agreement. Hamas and Israel reportedly agreed to halt hostilities from the other day on, implementing this multi-step pacification plan to end the war. And the agreement came after several bilateral talks mediated by Qatar. And the final terms of the deal are very unfavorable to Israel, which has led to very harsh criticism from the Zionist press, who describe it as a surrender to Hamas. And of course, you know, Ben Gvir has stepped down from Netanyahu's party. Smotrich is still in there. If Smotrich left, Netanyahu would be in some serious trouble because his party will lose control of the Knesset. But Smotrich stayed. Gvir said, nope, if you're going to do this ceasefire, because Gvir, of course, is dedicated to the proposition that we have to destroy all life in the Gaza, Palestinian life. So as a result of the political pressure here, about middle of last week, Netanyahu announced his interest in delaying the signing of the agreement due to some unfounded accusations of violations allegedly on the part of Hamas, I think in the West Bank. But then all of a sudden there's new Israeli airstrikes occurring in Gaza on the same day that Netanyahu is blaming it on Hamas. Israel is airstrikes into the Gaza, killing dozens of people. And then only a few hours after that, reports started coming out that the agreement had been signed in Doha, in Qatar. And it's still too early to say what the final outcome of this is going to be. I think it's kind of cute how Biden's tried to take, as he's going out, credit for this. And it kind of made me step back a little bit, and maybe I have prejudged some Zionist pressure on Trump to continue what's going on continue Blinken's program of genocide. But then Trump comes out with that Jeffrey Sachs thing on his Truth Social, and then he makes the threat if the hostages are not released, all hell would pay by the time, if they weren't released by the time of his inauguration, all hell would have to be paid. Whose hostages? See, the immediate assumption is that Hamas has got to release all these hostages, or Hamas, there will be hell to pay. Well, Hamas has already driven the IDF out of Gaza. The only thing Israel can do now is air bomb with our bombs the Gazan people and the Palestinians. So for the Palestinians, the true war here is only going to end when Israel withdraws from Palestine. And for Zionists, yes, I said Palestine, and for Zionists, the end depends on the success of the ethnic cleansing plan of Gaza and the West Bank. However, the halting of bombings and killings obviously is a significant political victory for the Palestinian resistance, especially considering the favorable terms that Hamas got. And the agreement, as outlined in the final terms, establishes a prisoner exchange ratio. Did you see that? One Israeli for 50, or is it 60? 50 or 60 Palestinians. One Israeli for 50 Palestinians. And so Tel Aviv is required to completely withdraw from Gaza and stop the attacks, as was evidenced by the appearance of Hamas soldiers on trucks and whatever, armored vehicles, driving in the streets of Gaza. And Hamas maintains, as a part of this agreement, legitimate political authority in Gaza. In other words, the agreement includes substantial concessions on the part of Israel towards the Palestinians in Gaza, clearly showing who the winning side is. The side that was in the position to demand the terms for a ceasefire was Hamas. And so who won? And if you stand back from that, this was all written up in May of last year, as you well know. And why didn't Biden do something about it? Because Biden isn't in control. Blinken and Sullivan are, and whoever tells them what to do. This could easily have been done, but then Trump comes in and says, all right, enough's enough. Get out of the pool. Go home. It's over with. So is it possible that this agreement is going to fail early on? Because the agreement says Israel can withdraw from it any time they want. They don't even have to have a good reason. And if Netanyahu begins to face his own political defeat with the Knesset and with the citizens of Israel, he might just get this thing going again. Because Tel Aviv, in the long run, I think will be viewed by all analysts as the defeated side of this war. And it's important to emphasize that war is a political phenomenon. War isn't a military one. The military comes in when they're told to come in. But the thing that leads up to war is a political thing, a geopolitical thing that caused World War I, caused World War II, and is threatening to cause World War III. And so through political machinations or intentional deliberations, you can back down from the war without the military ever being involved. And so war is an extreme political mechanism where two or more political entities confront each other using violence because there's nothing left as their legitimate weapon. But in a political event, I mean, the military is where the other one finally leaves the battlefield and goes home, then the other military wins the war, like you saw there at the end of World War II, when the Russians finally moved in and took over Berlin. There was nothing left. Then the Americans come in, and after the Russians had already ended the war in Berlin, the Americans come in and grab their part of the spoils. But the winner in the war is the one that achieves their political objectives, regardless of what the militaries do. And what was the political objective of the Allies? Well, it was to stop the Wehrmacht, stop Hitler. What was the political objective of Stalin? Because he didn't have to do what he did in punishing the Germans after the first week of May of 1945, in subjugating all of Eastern Europe. That was his objective. That was the objective of the world oligarchs that were controlling Stalin. Well, what are the political objectives in Gaza? Despite the military, the Hamas military not being defeated. They're out there in the streets as soon as the ceasefire starts. I thought that was awfully ballsy of them to do that, because I wouldn't trust Netanyahu or the IDF. But can you lose military battles and still politically win in the end? Because every time Hamas would begin to show up, the IDF would come in with the 2,000-pound bombs, and unfortunately, the IDF, whoever was guiding in those 2,000-pound missiles, mistook Palestinian innocents, men, women, and children who had nothing to do with Hamas, as Hamas targets. Now, look at Vietnam and look at Afghanistan, and all the battles and the carpet bombing and the napalm and everything else. In both cases, Afghanistan and Vietnam, the United States military just devastated huge areas of those countries, massacring local populations with some of the most inhumane acts of violence. But in Vietnam in '73 and Afghanistan in 2021, Washington was defeated at the end of the war, leaving the battlefield without ever having achieved its political objectives, while the other side, Ho Chi Minh, achieved their political objectives, which was to get the Allies out of Vietnam. And after 30 years, or is it 20 years? 20 years of fighting the Taliban, we turn around and give the country to the Taliban. Who won the Afghani war? Who won the Vietnam War? So in Gaza, Israel devastated the civilian population, destroying the infrastructure. If you've seen some of the helicopter pictures or the drone pictures that President Trump was referring to, my goodness, it's just, it looks like Dresden. It looks like Hamburg after the bombings. But Israel did not achieve their political goals, getting rid of Hamas and occupying Gaza and freeing the prisoners and freeing the hostages. I mean, no Israeli objective was achieved, so essentially in the bottom line, in the balance sheet here, Tel Aviv lost, while Hamas achieved its political objectives of weakening the Zionist enemy, as they called it, and preventing the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, clearly showing, I believe, that resistance won the war. Now, I got to decide here if I'm going to send, and I got away with this yesterday, send K-Talk to the news. And I'm thinking of not doing that, leaving things on manual as I did yesterday, except to announce this is K-Talk, KBJA, 1640 AM, Sandy, Salt Lake. And that's that for the radio crowd. And I don't mean to sound disparaging in any means. I mean, it's the radio crowd that, there was a time when, gosh, I forget how long ago, my show, according to Arbitron, had more listeners than Tom Barberi. Well, that's kind of nice. He was more popular and more well-known than me, but I had a bigger audience. I mean, there was a time when K-Talk just really was flourishing. And I'm grateful to Dick Perry, who has kept this thing going for all the various podcasters and talk show hosts and everybody else that's involved at K-Talk Radio to keep the basic theme of K-Talk going. Listen, I don't take my presence at K-Talk lightly. I really appreciate this opportunity. So I think I'm just going to go on yakking here. And I did the part I'm supposed to do with announcing the station identification. So let me go on here. Now, if you're just tuning in this morning at K-Talk, I am simulcasting at X and YouTube. And my address, if you would like to turn over to the stream, let me get this back this way. You can see the live presentation here. You would go to, on YouTube, youtube.com/@globalaffairs_unfiltered. If you wanted to listen to what I'm doing and saying here in live stream at X, you would go to x.com/@globalaffairsUF for unfiltered. And then tomorrow, I'll be doing a health program. And it has a different address. It's not Global Affairs. It's Breaking Health Barriers. Anyway, when you consider the fact that Israel, after what they have done to Gaza, what they have done and now it looks like the death toll, according to World Health Organization. Oh, and speaking of that, you saw that yesterday that Trump didn't just pull us out of the Paris Peace Accord, thank you, President Trump, but also out of the World Health Organization. Thank you, President Trump. That gives me some real hope in your presidency. But back to Israel here, I want to counter-distinguish between political differences between a country and military. And you don't bring the military in until you can't resolve your political differences. We saw that with the special military operation in the Ukraine. Putin kept saying, you guys keep crossing these red lines. If you don't stop it, we're going to invade. He didn't say it that way, but that's what the implication was. And so the Pentagon and MI6 and the City of London wants to see the end of Russia. They want Russia busted up into smaller pieces and then get these smaller pieces to fight each other like they established in the Middle East, starting with the Balfour Declaration, so that their ability to defend a bigger force coming in and taking over the spoils, as the United States now is taking up to 80% of Syrian oil. Did they pay Assad for that? No. Are they paying al-Jolani for that, or whatever his new name is? No. That's why some of the biggest military strongholds are there in northeastern, up near the Kurdish area of Syria, taking the oil. That's a story for another presentation. My point is, when you get these political differences, that's when the military comes in, when you can't get some kind of settlement between the political differences. Now that there is a ceasefire that may actually move into a truce, that may end up into the end of war, who won? And that's been my whole point here the last 15, 20 minutes. Obviously, Hamas won. But the situation is far from over. Only the end of the demilitarization of Israel and territorial reconfiguration would represent a final victory for Hamas. But regardless of this, that isn't going to happen. Israel isn't going to demilitarize, not with the support that Israel has in the American government and from the American military. But if the ceasefire holds, then Hamas is going to have plenty of time to have relief and enough time to regroup and strengthen for the next battle. I think I would try to remember a fact that I was reading somewhere else earlier, that for every Palestinian child that was shot by a sniper, and we know the children were being hit by snipers because of the bullet hole in their dead skulls. It wasn't shrapnel, it was a bullet hole. How many Palestinian people, boys, men, sign up to fight for Hamas every time they see something like that? But if the agreement fails, then it's going to be status quo taking place. Nothing's going to change. I think Trump is going to send weapons to Israel. But maybe with some caveat this time, that only in the sense of defending what is known as territorial Israel and not attacking Gaza. But in the end, I think Israel has been defeated from about every perspective here that you can look at. Now, they got some of their hostages back, but that's not the sum total of winning a war. Hopefully they'll get them all back. Hopefully the Palestinian prisoners will be released. And then what do you do? In the time that I have for the rest of the stream, I want to talk about how you don't just walk away with a Palestinian victory here, how you achieve peace. I mean, that's the main thing that I want to address, is this idea of how do you achieve peace? So, I want to go back to President Trump's inaugural address, where he was sending out all of these fireworks there at the beginning of his first 10 minutes of the address, sending out all of these messages ahead of time that he's immediately going to put into effect various things, not the least of which undoing, 100 mistakes of Blinken. I know he said Biden, but it's Blinken. And one of them that was mentioned in the lead of his address was that he promised to declassify the documents around John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Martin Luther King, and other topics. Whether it will be the full documents remains to be seen. But remember, the last time he mentioned this, I think it was Judge Napolitano on one of his podcasts. He was talking to Trump at Mar-a-Lago. And he said that if you have seen in these documents what I have seen, you wouldn't declassify them either for matters of national security. Well, that may have changed given the fact that after he has been through the mill now, and he does not have a re-election agenda ahead of him, perhaps with all the unresolved, unclarified assassination attempts against him as well, maybe he is completely committed to declassifying these documents. They will look very redacted, of course, but there's this huge freak out that I talked about yesterday, Peter Schroeder in Foreign Affairs, warning how many heads are going to be rolling as a result of Trump getting in there. And Peter Schroeder works for the U.S. State Department, or at least he did as of yesterday. And then there's other signs. The fact that the tenor, Christopher Macchio, singing the national anthem, an accomplished singer, Trump compares him to Pavarotti. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. I still had a hard time understanding what Macchio was saying. I mean, I know the national anthem. This other tribute to America, I could only pick up a few words here and there. But I think it was really good. This Italian-American culture is very promising because Macchio's, the thing I did like about him in his off comments after he was singing was that the point of music and art in general is to ennoble the human spirit, not just for the sake of musical presentation, but to help us reach for the highest that's within us through these kinds of presentations, as opposed to some of the basest hip-hop stuff and rap that does not tend to ignoble the human spirit. Also, there were some very promising signs that, according to the Wall Street Journal's press after the inauguration, Trump told his advisors that he wants to go to China relatively soon and he talked to Xi Jinping Friday on the phone before he became president. And he put on his social media that the call was a very good one for both China and the United States. And he said this: "It is my expectation that we will solve many problems together starting immediately and do everything possible to make the world more peaceful and safe." Well, if these words would be followed by the deeds that would make that happen, like stop weapons to Gaza, stop weapons to the Ukraine, and back down from these ridiculous military moves that make us look like we're going to go into the war with Taiwan and China. You know, when you have two of the world's leading nuclear powers sitting down and talking to one another, as Trump has said he's going to do now with Putin, maybe the nuclear clock will back away a few seconds from midnight, maybe a few minutes. And also the fact that Trump mooted that he either invites Xi to the United States or that he would himself travel to China fairly soon is it's extremely important. Remember, at the beginning of his first term, his China visit was just spectacular. And Xi Jinping had spent the entire day going to the rich history of China, took him to the Forbidden City. It all looked very, very good, very well between the two of them from the very beginning, which was unfortunately sabotaged by the blame for COVID. And then now it's the China virus. And then, of course, Mark Milley's act of treason by telling China, if we're going to attack you, we'll tell you in advance. But we'll see who prevails here. Very important is the fact that the Chinese vice president, who is already in Washington, and the Chinese vice president has already met with Vice President Vance and attended the inauguration ceremony as Xi's special representative. He said that China and the United States are both great countries and the Chinese and Americans are both great people, and they're now working concurrently to achieve their respective development goals and dreams. Well, I hope that's moving in the right direction. I don't want war with China. And Trump has said several times, I don't want war, I'm against war. Another aspect surrounding this new administration that I think is worth mentioning, according to a report in The Independent, Trump is considering rejecting the United Kingdom's nominee for ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson. I've talked about Peter Mandelson before the election, back in November, because he was part of the move to bring 100 British diplomats, or at least representatives of the United Kingdom, into the United States campaigning for Kamala Harris. And why would Britain want Kamala Harris as president? Well, because she's the ultimate empty suit, and the collective Biden would move over to the other side of the room to the collective Harris and would still be in charge, and England would still have its special relationship with the United States. So anyway, The Independent, the British paper, writes that he could be injected because rejected as the nominee for ambassador to the United States, because Trump is still very upset with the British Labour Party that sent the representatives to campaign for Kamala Harris, and that Mandelson is a very well-known member of the British intelligence community. And given the fact that everybody knows this, it could very well be that it's a rejection of that policy. This is one of the things that I enjoy so much about the unpredictability of Trump. Because once I finally made my mind up, boy, he's what America needs, and then I made my mind up, it's just going to be same old, he will set off these fireworks in a nice little curveball pitch. Oh, that brings me up short. Well, maybe I've misjudged him. So another unbelievable outburst came from the German ambassador, whose name is Andreas Michaelis, who wrote a confidential diplomatic paper that somehow got leaked, in which he said that he thinks Trump has an agenda of maximal disruption, and that he will try to eliminate the independence of the legislature. He will stop the efforts of the media, law enforcement, and that jailing of his enemies and their prosecution will now become an instrument of policy and so forth. Now, if you were Trump and the ambassador from Germany was saying these things publicly, would you want to sit down with that ambassador? Now, while he's a career diplomat, and his roots are in the circles around Joschka Fischer and similar elements, and he's a kind of an unholy sign of those who are still trying to hold on desperately to every last string pulling effect inside the deep state. In any case, there's other elements around the transition of the government, is the fact that it's all over the international media right now, that the U.S. journalists Sam Husseini and Max Blumenthal, that I talked at length about yesterday, were carried out. Well, Blumenthal walked out, but Husseini was carried out, arms and legs, in Blinken's final press conference. And there's a video which shows several uniformed security people dragging out Husseini, and rather, not forcibly, but because Blumenthal left without being manhandled, getting them out of the room. And Blumenthal in particular, who said of the memory of Blinken as he was being escorted out of the room, why did you allow the Holocaust in our time to happen? How does it feel to have your legacy be genocide? So, and then Sam Husseini was demanding, while he was sitting there in his chair, you pontificate about a free press. Why aren't you in The Hague? Again, as I said yesterday, I have a hero list. Most of them are the guests on Judge Napolitano's podcast, but these two guys just, well, Sam Blumenthal is a regular, Max Blumenthal, excuse me, not Sam. Sam's or Richard, not the Senator Blumenthal. Two more heroes. And that is not off the wall, because, I mean, other than that one knows it already, but the New York Times reported in late 2022 that then Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, had advised Kyiv to capitalize on their battlefield successes by seeking peace talks with Moscow, and that it was Blinken at that time who insisted that the Ukraine should press on with their military campaign. So like Boris Johnson, the culprits for almost 1 million dead now in the Ukraine are really clearly pointing in that direction. Blinken doesn't have just the Gazan genocide, which is bad enough. According to the World Health Organization, perhaps as many as 200,000 dead innocent Gazans, not Hamas, innocent Gazans, who never picked up a gun, who never threw a grenade, who never did anything militarily against the IDF, 200,000 of them dead. And that was a year ago. It's probably more than that now. And then 1 million dead in the Ukraine. Blinken's got some things to answer for. And now the other major topic inside the ceasefire, which is proceeding with certain interruptions, is Itamar Ben-Gvir, as I said earlier, has left the government. But there's a lot of reporters and commentators who all agree on the same line, that it was Trump who forced Netanyahu to accept the ceasefire by just getting his envoy, Steve Witkoff, to go tell Netanyahu all hell's going to break loose if the ceasefire is not there before Trump gets into office. Which makes absolutely clear that Biden and Blinken and Sullivan obviously could have done the same thing, because the agreement that was signed here the other day is the same as the agreement last May. And had Blinken any indication in his heart of hearts, if it still beats, to have stopped the genocide. But as everybody knows, instead, Blinken and Sullivan and Biden enabled Israel's war with heavy weapons and ammunition without interruption, without which Israel would have had to have stopped the fighting. So this is going to remain an issue in history. And now the big phase, or the big question is, will ceasefire go through all three phases? Which is fraught with all these dangers and challenges. And I think what has to be done, as I said, what is the answer now? Now that Hamas has won, and some of the things they're demanding is not going to happen. You're not going to see the demilitarization of Israel. Israel should militarize, in my opinion, to the extent of defending themselves every bit as much as Palestine should militarize itself to the point of defending itself against IDF aggression and invasion, including the West Bank. That's not Israel. But Netanyahu, of course, wants to annex the West Bank. But now there's a ceasefire. And I said, what are you going to do about this? Well, China is talking about implementing the Oasis Plan, LaRouche's idea from back in the 1970s, which is not unlike the Nawapa Plan that was figured out back in the 1940s with Roosevelt as to how to turn the western deserts into a garden by the movement of water. Approximately 80%, I'm getting off topic here for a second because I want to get back to the ceasefire and what's going on in the Middle East, but 80% of the rainfall in the Pacific Northwest flows out to the Pacific Ocean. With the creation of reservoirs and the creation of dams and the creation of canals, by no other effort than gravity, that water could be contained through canals and distributed throughout the American West. At the time that NWAPA was put together, the North American Water and Power thing, I think is what it stood for, they figured it would cost maybe $80 billion to do that, which was an unbelievable amount of money back then. I think that's more than what World War II cost. But at today's dollars, I mean, we've already given almost twice that to Ukraine. Anyway, some of the talk going on between the Chinese ambassadors and America is this Oasis plan, and they have this big conference planned in the Middle East where the Oasis plan is going to be on the agenda. Now, the Oasis plan is to turn the Israeli and Palestinian deserts into an oasis. You can't do that without water, and lots of water. Now, there's already nuclear-powered desalination taking place in Israel to get fresh water to various parts of Israel where there is no flow of water coming down from Lebanon or from the Golan Heights. I think the plan called for like 4 rather large nuclear-powered desalination plants that every second of the day bringing in ocean water. You're not going to drain the Mediterranean, but bringing in ocean water, creating virtual rivers of fresh water. Well, it would be, distilled water, but it would certainly pick up minerals quickly as soon as it hit the water. It's the dirt. Literally rivers of water that could be diverted through canals, through irrigation projects, to literally turn the Sinai into a garden. Now, if people really wanted to help the future of mankind, if they were really committed to the concept of helping people realize the dream of happiness, part of the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Remember, Jefferson wanted life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. And Franklin, who had tremendous impact and influence on Jefferson, said, no, Tommy, no. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. People don't have a right to property. Now, if you acquire property, you might consider the fact that you have a right to hold on to it, but then you got to battle the state that wants to tax you for it. You have a right to life. Nobody taxes your life. You have a right to liberty, come and go. Nobody taxes that. And you have a right to happiness. Nobody taxes that. But they do tax property. As Franklin said, 2 things you're always going to have is death and taxes. So they changed it to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, you can't have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness without agreements between 2 previously warring countries, without an adequate way for people to provide for themselves. And in that part of the world, you can't do it without a lot of water. Not just the cessation of hostilities and taking your swords and beating them into plowshares. You've got to have a lot of water. And this was proposed back in the 1970s with Lyndon LaRouche and the creation of his Oasis plan that is still being talked about today, and especially with Chinese diplomats. They're saying this can be done. We will come and help you. We will help you put in these desalination plants that are nuclear powered with the latest generations of nuclear energy, which produces far less waste, very efficient, and very safe. And with the amount of heat these things can produce, you can distill the salt water coming out of the Mediterranean. Now, if Trump really wants to make a different policy than the previous administration regarding the Middle East, that's a direction for him to go. Now, I know it's been proposed to him because I know some people he listens to that don't really make it into the press, but maybe shortly will. Because you can't have peace in 2 warring nations without those warring nations not just recognizing the sovereignty of the other, but having within themselves all that they need to produce a productive economy that will allow even the least of their citizens a chance at life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, another thing besides water to the Middle East, is that the United States nuclear doctrine about claiming hegemony and claiming even the right to use nuclear weapons preemptively, if that hegemony is threatened, which Admiral Thomas Buchanan, as I've mentioned a number of times, had said at the CSIS project on nuclear issues back in just after the election in November, that Trump should do something to change that doctrine, because that is what could set the world on fire at any moment, and what would happen to the 800 U.S. bases around the world. What would happen to the nuclear modernization program, where the new B-61-12 gravity bombs, which are now fully deployed forward, have experienced forward deployment. According to the United Nations, or the United States National Security Administration, that installation of the forward deployment of these gravity nukes are in Belgium, they're in Italy, they're in Germany, they're in Netherlands, and they're in Turkey. And of course, the Russian Federation is well aware of this. But these modernized nuclear weapons, extremely dangerous, because they lower the threshold for nuclear war tremendously, the current nuclear doctrine. Trump needs to change that. He needs to change it and back down from the fact that, as the Russians were forced to do with Biden changing the nuclear doctrine where Putin brings in preemptive use. And that's our current nuclear doctrine in America. Preemptive use of these horrible weapons that are now deployed in Belgium, Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, and Turkey. So that has to be revised, hopefully as a part of a new arms negotiation, because the START treaty runs out next year, the strategic arms limitation. And now concerning what Trump is going to do in respect to Iran, which was one of his pet projects. In a negative way, of course, in his first administration, but that was probably due to some very bad advisors. But nevertheless, how fragile the situation is there now, the underlying fact that 2 Iranian judges, Supreme Court judges, were just killed in a shooting in the Iranian Supreme Court building just this last weekend, where a gunman had infiltrated the Supreme Court and then killed these 2 judges who had a very high reputation, and then he turns a gun on himself and kills himself. What the ramifications of those assassinations are, I don't think it's been fully played out yet, because who sent him in there? You know, it's one thing for some religious motivation in the name of God to attack this other, as a zealot, to attack this other religion believing in God, that somehow they've taken the wrong step and we need to kill their leader, as has been the battle for hundreds of years now between the Christians and the Catholics, between the Shia and the Sunni, and other religious things around the world. We don't know if this was a political assassination or a religiously driven assassination, but the world has dramatically changed compared to 4 years ago when Trump left the White House. And at that time, there was no dynamic, I mean, even comparable to what is going on in the world today. Especially with BRICS. Look how far BRICS has come since Trump left office. And how is Trump going to relate to BRICS? I mean, he's made a couple of negative comments about it, but he was expected to. Now that he's in power and he can't be reelected, unless there's a new amendment to the Constitution, does he agree, like Blinken and Biden, that BRICS is a threat to America? Or is he going to try what I, in my heart of heart, hopes or hope that he would do. Cooperate. I mean, the BRICS in the meantime is expanding. Nigeria has now just joined this economic bloc as the 9th partner state. Nigeria is Africa's 4th largest economy, the world's 6th most populous nation with almost 230 million people. And they are now formally a partner state of BRICS, not a full member, but that's, but become a partner happened earlier than expected. I'm not sure how much you're up on Nigeria. Nigeria is about 4 times the size of Utah in square miles. 4 times. As big as Utah is. And even as big as Utah is, there's several states bigger than Utah in America. But Nigeria is 4 times the size of Utah, but has 60 times more people. So how crowded must that be? But they produce a lot of oil and a lot of strategic minerals, and they're now moving into BRICS, which just consolidates more so the power of BRICS to bring in the 6th most populous nation. They already have the 2 most populous, China and India. And then when you look at what is happening in improving the relationships between China and India, where things are getting better there all the time, politically, economically, because they're both important members, the founding members of BRICS. And Indonesia, when you look at the kind of power that is coming together and how the West is still fighting against this, there's several things I want to see Trump do in his first 100 days. And one of which is to seriously look at BRICS. You don't have to give up your sovereignty. You don't have to give up your military. You don't have to give up your borders. You just sit down with who previously may have been an enemy and figure out how you can work together productively, economically, for the betterment of your citizens. And take your swords and beat them into plowshares. And this is in stark contrast. The discussions between Chinese and Indian diplomats, and I'm not going to bore you with that. I find it fascinating because India and China at one time were just ready to kill each other. Now they're sitting talking of cooperative agreements within the BRICS environment. Now, in stark contrast to that, with the absolutely foolish behavior of the German foreign minister, Baerbock, where Colonel McGregor found some harsh words, basically calling Scholz and Baerbock, he said they were ridiculous, amoral puppets, and saying that Germany needs to go back to have good relations with Russia to save peace in Europe, as it was done all the way back to Otto von Bismarck, stopping the war relationship between Russia and Germany. You have to go back that far in Russian-German relations, back before World War I, to find somebody sitting down between 2 very strong strategic powers to stop their warfare and sit down and, okay, what do you got in mind? Well, how about trade? We got all this gas. We got all these strategic minerals that we're just beginning to discover now that Mendeleev has finally given us the periodic chart. I'm being silly. Otherwise, there are many articles on how Germany right now is at a point of decision that if they continue to stay under the Anglo-American thinking, Germany is robbing itself of any future independence. And which is a big question coming up in the coming election, because Merz the Labor Party has about a 10% popular vote ahead of the AFD, the alternate party, which is really, this may not be fair, but this is how I see it. The Trumps of Germany is in the second position. And the Labor, the MERS, M-E-R-Z, MERS, I think it's pronounced MERS, once the Anglo-American, the British-American relationship that has an awful lot to do with what's going on in Germany, the decline of Germany. MERS wants this to continue. So nobody from the German government, except for Michaelis, who had nasty things to say about Trump, was invited to the inauguration. Even Ursula von der Leyen wasn't invited to the inauguration. So I just, these things that continue to go on here, that I try to gather as much information from all the different sources that I can to prevent some kind of coherent picture as to what's going on around the world here for you. But MERS was he was an investment asset manager for BlackRock. I don't know that he isn't still. And if you look at how BlackRock is structured, I mean, it's completely incestuous. And they all own these high percentages of these very rich clients' assets that they manage. And it's just completely cross-owned. I mean, it's one representative together with two other major asset managers. They are Wall Street, BlackRock. And they are Wall Street, they are the military industrial complex, they are the pharmaceutical industrial complex. And if the past of MERS being in the middle of all of this stuff, and his plans for what he thinks should happen to Germany, if that's not bad enough, he also wants to deliver the German Taurus missiles to the Ukraine to fire into deep Russia. And so when the German ambassador says these horribly nasty things about Trump, these are just little dynamics that are coming together here over the next 100 days to see how this plays out, because the German elections are in March. And that will determine whether Germany can return back to its productive relationship or forever continue to sink into the stink hole of a dying European Union. All right, I got a couple of more notes that I want to get into. I don't think that it's exaggerated that the European Union, is in a state of disintegration. The talk is that Trump is going to, if there's any continued help for the Ukrainians, it's going to have to come from Europe. He's alluded to that. He said that before the inauguration. I don't know that he said anything about that after. But I think it could be, when you look at American hegemony, and this was the thing that concerned me about what Trump is trying to do to enlarge the area of U.S. hegemony by acquiring Greenland, and his comments about Canada and Mexico and the Panama Canal. I mean, are these distractive statements? Is he just puffing up his chest? You know, I mean, when he comes out and says, hey, that's our turf. Other great powers have their turf. This is our turf. We're going to take back the canal. We're going to take Greenland, make Canada the 51st state, and probably include Mexico. Well, is that the best thing for humanity? Or is the best thing for humanity? And this is where all of the returning all of the illegal immigrants to their countries. There's a little thing that needs to be done before you start returning these illegals to their countries. And that's a massive economic change inside of these countries that foster their own internal development so that the quality of life and the level of individual production under the guise of internal credit within these countries would turn these countries into something that their citizens wouldn't want to leave. And I often use the discussion and the programs that were going on between Lopez Portillo and Ronald Reagan to correct that problem. So that's obviously not written in stone, what Trump plans on doing with the canal and Greenland. It's just been talked so far. It's just a hypothesis, but the move that needs to be made by Trump is to put humanity first before you start acquiring more real estate. These are populist ideas. Why not take Ukraine? Well, the most northern tip of, Greenland, the most northern tip of Greenland is sitting there on the edge of Russian territorial water. And the northern tip of Greenland, well up inside the Arctic Circle, is less than 2,000 miles from Moscow. Well, Russia isn't going to like that. That would just make the northern tip of Greenland another Oreshnik missile target. We have to make a move to put humanity first. Then you can develop your national interest. And how would Trump put humanity first? Stop sending bombs to Israel. Stop sending bombs to the Ukraine. And sit down and talk. But Netanyahu isn't a talker. No. Netanyahu, I'm afraid, has to go. And you have to put in somebody who absolutely believes in the overall welfare and the continuation of Israel as a sovereign state without having to kill innocent Palestinian people. And sit down, and the only answer is a two-state solution. Palestine has to be given their own geographical determination and existence recognized by the major countries on the planet. And then you have to, as I spent several minutes here earlier in this hour program, developing water projects. Because it won't do anything to stop the shooting and leave things as they are. The Palestinians are starving to death. Those that are still alive. You have to do things that demand the higher aspects of humanity. Instead of putting all that money into bombs, put it into agricultural projects. Now, in the Ukraine, there may be a change from Zelensky to Zelensky. Trump has already indicated he's going to demand higher financial contributions from the European nations. That's to be expected. And then the possibility of a coming conflict with Iran. In light of the January 17th paperwork that was signed between the Russian Federation and Iran. It does not call, I think I talked about this yesterday, it does not call for, nor does it allow mutual defense. There's no treaty in there about that. It's mostly economic development. But I think we're in a situation which has the potential to move to a whole new day for mankind. And if they can get this Oasis plan going, it would take 2 to 3 years to get it off its feet and actually get started. But it's completely doable. The uniqueness of it is what is drawing attention from China wanting to help in the Middle East. China gets most of its oil from Iran through the Red Sea. So obviously China wants peace in this area as well. And they're willing to do whatever they can to help bring that to pass. But there is a growing awakening inside of Russia now with their success in the Ukraine. And a great awakening of Chinese culture inside of China because of the advancements they've made in the last 2 decades. But in Europe, you see it going the opposite direction. You see what essentially is the coming collapse of the European Union and the collapse of these countries that are still under the control of the City of London and Wall Street. And so there is signs of upheaval, especially in Croatia, in Bulgaria, Hungary, and in Slovakia, where they're beginning to break away from European Union control. And they want to do business with Russia. They want to be friends with Russia. They want treaties with Russia for mutual development. And so you've still got this battle going back and forth between the East and the West, because the West is simply not going to be happy until Russia is finally weakened and defeated. And one of the big proponents of that at the beginning of the Biden administration was Secretary Austin. When is the last time you saw him, let alone heard anything from him? And I haven't heard Trump say anything about that. But when Hegseth is approved, which could come today, maybe tomorrow at the latest, as Secretary of Defense, it's going to be very, he's going to go in there with some of his promises about getting DEI and woke out of the military, creating a military that promising young men and women who really want to be in the military can join without fear of DEI or those kinds of things, or the woke military is going to disappear overnight. But what is his attitude towards the Palestinian cause? What's his attitude towards the Ukrainian cause? Is he just going to step right in where the disappeared, missing Austin before was promoting both of these? So, again, I think that the approach that the world needs right now towards peace is to seriously look at what BRICS has to offer. They're still unorganized to some degree. They don't even have a trading species between them yet. They had kind of a basket of trading instruments, the ruble, the yuan, the renminbi, trying to work out some means of having a species of trade, but they're all backed by gold. No more a floating dollar. They don't want to abandon the petrodollar. They don't want to abandon the American dollar. They just want it tied down to a value that can be predicted 6 months from now as to what it is now based on production, instead of this floating interest rate stuff that has actually given us the interest rates that we have, the incredible deficits that we're facing, and an American government that thinks that there's no end to the piggy bank because there's no accounting for that. So there's several different dynamics that coming together, I think portends a much better future. You know, the Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, and Howard Lutwick, the Commerce Secretary, both fervent advocates and large holders of Bitcoin and other digital coins, are in their pitch that's being thrown to the Senate committees through the media and their testimonies, presumably already been made to Trump, that the Tether coin now is equal to $1, supposedly worth $1 as the Tether holdings sell their Tether coins. It purchases equal amounts of U.S. Treasury securities that backs up, to some degree, the value of U.S. Treasury securities. And so this tether with Bitcoin that both of these men hold billions of dollars worth, it admitted a private security with no fixed value in dollars, as the supposed main liquidity source will become a bigger and bigger source of demand for the U.S. Treasury debt, and actually might help keep the Treasury market liquid as the national debt rockets upward from its current $36 trillion debt. But the Federal Reserve supposedly is already doing this, but, you know, funding new Treasury debt with existing Treasury debt that's been going on for some time now. Nobody wants to buy U.S. Treasuries. So there's the little deals behind the scenes where, well, we're not going to buy the products of your country imported into our country unless you invest in our Treasury by the buying of U.S. bonds. And the other country says, yeah, but look at Trump's coming tariff threats. And why do we want to buy your Treasury bonds when they're not going to be worth next month what they're worth today when we have to invest in them in order to do business with you? And so apparently, Bessent and Lutwick, Treasury Secretary and Commerce Secretary, both who support tariffs, are supposed to be able to take care of this problem. Now, the money market mutual funds, I wasn't going to get into this, but I've got a couple of minutes left. In the 1980s, were supposedly always to be worth $1 per share due to their holdings in the treasuries. And then you remember September 2008 and Lehman Brothers and the event there that just kind of broke the buck, fell way below the dollar. The global financial crisis triggered. Members of Congress were told that they either had to pass TARP or call out the National Guard across the country. You remember that. These are the kinds of things that Bessent and Lutwick are facing. And I don't know, over the next 100 days, it's going to be of Trump's presidency. It's going to be very interesting how this plays out. Now, tomorrow, I will do a 2-hour stream on both YouTube and X. I'm supposed to have that here in front of me to tell you what the addresses are. Well, those of you who are already on the Wednesday stream know what the addresses are. I'll tell the K-Talk Radio tomorrow when the show begins if they want to include that as well. But again, I ask you to like and subscribe and retweet the stuff, pass it on, so that we can continue to build the audience. So I'm going to turn K-Talk Radio back over to K-Talk. And I am going to end the stream. thank you once again for being a part of this and helping me build an audience by liking and subscribing, and I will